Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Making Action Happen. I'm Sara Blackhurst.
And I'm Brian McCain.
And we have special guest Jeff Hurd with us today. He's come in special just to talk with us about not only the race for CD3, which everybody's been talking about. I mean, this is national news kind of thing, but just some of the issues that are going on and some of the preview of coming attractions for a 2024 election. So thanks, Jeff, so much for being with us. You joined Action 22 probably, it's been close to a year now, I think.
It's been a while.
And we've had some really great conversations, and you've been over here a few times, and we're just really excited to have you here. But I think everybody wants to know and is going to, the question.
I got the most important question.
Okay.
How many miles have you put on your car since this has started?
Oh boy, thousands is the answer. I don't have a specific, but it's a large number. So
yeah.
I'm a frequent flyer at the service shop and getting things looked at on the car. So
do you average? I'm going to guess that you average 4,000 to 5,000 miles a month right now.
It's a pretty good guess. Yeah.
I know because I put about 3,000 miles on my car a month, so I'm guessing that you're close to that.
And then the hours that you spend depend on what the weather's like.
Yes.
When
right.
You're heading across the state.
Gosh,
and those hours add up if you're sitting on Monarch Pass waiting for the snowplows to clear the way. So
well, I always joked around that sometimes, like usually in December, January in Colorado, you could probably get to the Gulf of Mexico faster than you could drive from Pueblo to Grand Junction.
That's true.
Especially if you take I-70.
Yeah, I've done it. So,
well, thanks for having me. It is great to be here.
We're
I thought you were going to say what Brian's middle name was. A D is...
DeMato was the last time. I think the last thing I put on your paycheck.
Di Matteo? No, it was Di Matteo.
Was it Di Matteo?
Yeah, something like that.
I meant it to be DeMato, like
DeMato,
Mato. But I've been doing that. We make a joke about that quite a bit. So I've got to ask you first and foremost, because you've been in the race, and then your opponent, who is a spectacle in so many ways, decided to drop out and run in a different district, which we all sort of there was lots of noises made at that point, different things said, but you were in it from the very beginning. Now there's a whole lot more people in it. How's that transition been for you? Because you got a head start.
Yes. Well, first, thanks very much for having me. It's great to be here, and I really am excited by the work that Action 22 is doing and getting to know you guys better and seeing the great things that are happening here in Southeast Colorado in large part because of you. So it's great to be here.
Thank you.
And thanks for having me. This is my first time running for a political office, so it's been kind of an interesting experience. I'm not a career politician and hadn't even run for dog catcher before. So the attention has been something that I certainly expected, but my plan is going to be the same, which is to stay focused on policy and solutions for Western and Southern Colorado. That's the reason I got into this race, and regardless of who I'm facing in the primary, the focus is going to stay the same, and that's on improving lives for families and for small businesses and for communities in Southern and Western Colorado. So plan stays the same regardless of who's in the race.
And it's frustrating, too, because we saw this with the mayor election that just happened this week in Pueblo, where a lot of the attacks, and I'm seeing this across the board in other states and other regions, where you have newcomers coming into the race, somebody that hasn't run before. And it's almost like a negative thing. They're trying to turn it into a negative thing. Well, I know what I'm doing because I've been elected and I've ran many times, and he or she doesn't have experience because they haven't done this. I'm like, that's not a bad thing, right? You're not a career politician. And with that, I don't know if everybody knows your background, but why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I was born here in Colorado. I grew up on the Western Slope, a proud graduate of Grand Junction High School. It took me about 1 year of high school football to realize I have only about this much athletic talent, and that if I was going to succeed, I'd have to work hard. And so I did that, went to college, and came back home to practice law. So I'm an attorney. Most of my law practice is representing rural electric cooperatives on the Western Slope. And through that, I've come to see the challenges and the opportunities that we face in Western and Southern Colorado. So I'm a family man also, married for 18 years to my wife, Barbara, and we have 5 children together. Our oldest is a freshman in high school, and our youngest is still in the school of hard knocks. He's still in his diapers. So they keep us busy. But they're part of the reason that I'm running is I believe that we're being left behind in Western and Southern Colorado. And I've heard it said that our greatest export are our children. They grow up and they leave and they don't come back. And I'd like to be somebody that is part of a solution that gives our children and our grandchildren opportunities that if they want, they can stay and live and raise their families in Western and Southern Colorado and have good jobs that support not just their families, but their communities as well. So that's the reason I'm running, and that's my personal why. And I think you're right, Brian. I certainly haven't run for office before, but I'm a problem solver, and I've done that for my clients. And don't take my word for it. Talk to the folks that know me and have worked with me over the past decade in rural Colorado, and they'll tell you that I'm smart and I'm humble and I'm hardworking, and I get results for rural Colorado.
We appreciate that, and like Brian said, we kind of we like, I think, newcomers to that. But and this is one of my favorite things to learn and understand about a candidate is you go into this process with certain things that you see or certain perceptions. But as you go along, those perceptions kind of change. You learn a lot while you're doing it. What have been some of the things that you started this, and then in the last several months that you've been in it, that you're like, oh, this, okay, that's a new perspective that I wasn't expecting, and that really makes a difference in what you're doing?
That's a great question, Sarah. I would probably say the issue that has come to the forefront for me since I started running that was on my radar screen, but it wasn't front and center, is the border and securing the border. And I'll tell you that issue and illegal immigration and the crime, the drugs that are coming over the border is something that is now front and center. And that's actually my top issue that I'm focused on in this race. So that's something that I was certainly aware of and concerned about, but in the past several months has come to the front and center of my race. And that's an issue that's of critical importance for Colorado and for our country.
Yeah, especially right now with everything happening, and you're even seeing kind of a shift from the Democrat side where they haven't been that strong on border policy, but you have Fetterman coming out saying like, what's wrong with saying we need to secure the border?
That's right,
and you're seeing more and more of that side of the aisle saying like, you know what, this is a problem. We're seeing this as you travel the district and. We've brought it up on here many times. You have some of the poorest counties, poorest towns in the country right next to some of the richest, most well-off towns in the country. What are you hearing from the average person? Like, what are they concerned about? What is their number one issue? Like, what do they want to see from you if you get elected?
Well, certainly the border is something that comes up frequently, and crime, and that's an issue front and center, I would say. And there's primarily there is a federal role in that as well. There's I was reading about, it's called high intensity drug trafficking areas. Hit areas. There's some DEA funding that's possible that the federal government can have a role in helping address some of the crime and drugs that are flowing into our communities. And that's certainly, I see the federal government as a partner in solving that. Certainly we need help from state and local authorities as well. But that's something that's come to my mind front and center, is that immigration issue, and trying to think of ways in which the federal government can help solve that problem in addition to securing the border.
And the HIDA areas or zones, I forget how they do it. In the Four Corners area, that used to be a part of it, and then it's not. It's not anymore. And you saw that the HIDA concentrated on the Front Range, and it was interesting over the years because I was doing this for a long time and involved with that group and that stuff. You saw a lot of it just go over to the West Slope. Yeah. And, it used to be Pueblo to Denver, Highway 50, and then now you go over to the West Slope, and that's where a lot of it is. And I don't think people realize that in a lot of these counties that have a highway going through it or a major roadway, there's times where you may not even have a police officer on the road. Between 2 and 6 in the morning, you might have one person within 50 miles with a 20-minute response time. And we had Victor Galarza, he runs the Vigilance Project, and he was on, and he's he's from the Four Corner area, and he tells me just horror stories about how something will happen and there's no coverage whatsoever. Yeah. And he's been an advocate to get the HIDA program back on that side just to get those resources. So it's, we always joke that, Denver ignores Southern Colorado, and I always say, like, have you been to the West Slope?
No, we're struggling out there, but I know it's throughout this district. And you're right, there is a lot of poverty, and there's a lot of families that are struggling. Another issue that I hear a lot about is energy and energy development, and the need to unlock the opportunities that we have under the ground in Western and Southern Colorado, and helping to create that new energy economy and transition as we move towards more and more electrification. That's also something that I think is a real opportunity for Western and Southern Colorado and jobs and lowering those energy costs. So that's also something else that I hear loud and clear when I'm on the campaign trail.
Yeah. So when you're out there and they're it's an interesting thing when you are having these sit-down conversations. Everybody has an idea. Have you heard any ideas that you thought, let's explore that a little bit more with regard to energy? Because these are you're talking in your area on the Western Slope. This is what we're talking about when we talk about just transition, for sure. And of course, we're in the middle of that here in Pueblo right now and in those discussions. And so have you heard a lot of offering on solutions, or do you feel like this is still a very politicized issue? What are your feelings as you guys are talking about this?
I think people recognize the challenge that's here and the opportunity, and I think that's something that stretches beyond just partisan boundaries. And I hear a lot of folks in distressed communities, Republican, Democrat, unaffiliated, who are talking about the need to develop energy in a responsible way. And they recognize that the best way to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions is to get energy out of Colorado. We have some of the cleanest hydrocarbons in the world, and we need to get those exported to help with energy independence here in the United States, but also helping our allies overseas. And it's a national security issue. It's an international security issue. And it's also something that I tell my Democratic friends, if you genuinely care about reducing global greenhouse gas emissions, then you ought to support energy in Colorado, in our natural gas industry, our clean coal industry. And then also looking at new options as well. I've heard it said, all of the above energy. My view is that's good. I would say best of the above. Let's look and see which of those options is the best, that makes the most sense. And to be open to thinking of things that are not necessarily on the table, small modular reactors, something that, provided that the community buys into those solutions, I think that's something that we should look at as well. So all options on the table, let's pick the best ones.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. For me, you answered that question correctly. We've had these discussions, of course, locally right here so much, and it's the heat has been turned up on that for sure, pun intended. So what else are you hearing? So we're hearing the same thing. People are constantly talking to us about public safety. They're talking to us about energy. What else are they?
Inflation is a big one.
Cost of living is a big deal. Yeah, particularly in rural parts of the state. I read a Colorado Sun article earlier this year that talked about how the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers with respect to inflation don't accurately account for the rural component of those costs. And folks in the state that have to travel further and pay more for gas and more wear on their car end up getting hurt even more by inflation than folks that live in urban areas of the state. And so, yes, the cost of groceries, the cost of utilities, the cost of energy. In my law practice, I work with rural electric cooperatives that are faced with upward rate pressure that are caused by some of these bad regulations. And so those costs hurt rural Colorado in a special way that I don't think is necessarily reflected in just the government's Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers. And so that's something that I think we need to focus on in rural Colorado, and organizations like Action 22 are at the forefront of speaking as one strong voice to address those cost issues that hurt rural Colorado in ways that others don't experience in more urban areas.
So we, as we were preparing for some of these discussions, and to your point, we looked at where's inflation the worst, and Colorado was number 2 on 2 separate lists for that. and one was housing, and the other was, as to your point, about sort of 85% of Colorado was rural, and that factor they had factored in. Yes, that was part of the problem, and then we see it right where we're at, where I live south of Pueblo. And I live up in the mountains, but we saw literally 50 cents per gallon difference.
Oh boy!
Between the exit, the gas station at the exit there, and Pueblo, which was literally 20 minutes drive difference between those two places. Stay off of the interstate, but it's 50 cents per gallon difference, and so it's almost like you can't. That's a disparity that really nobody's accounting for on that rural side.
Absolutely. And then probably the average income of the folks that are paying that higher gas price is lower. So the average household income. So not only are their costs higher, but the resources that they have to pay them are lower. So yeah, it's really rural Colorado is getting squeezed big time by inflation. So it's definitely an issue that we need to address, and because it hurts rural Coloradans disproportionately.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to bring up veterans, and so that's Brian's area of expertise, and we have lots of discussions because there's a lot of uncertainty in that space right now. I'm sure in your travels you've had lots of conversations with lots of veterans.
Absolutely.
What are you hearing from them?
Well, first of all, this district has a very high percentage of veterans in it. I know in Pueblo County alone, I believe there are about 17,000 veterans. It's tough to tell. Some of the statistics can be in kind of a range, but it is a big number. And a lot of those veterans are suffering when it comes to a lack of quality medical care and mental health care. And that's something that we owe our veterans, particularly those who are service disabled, but all veterans, period. We owe them the best that we can give in terms of health care and benefits and qualifying for benefits. And I don't think we're doing an adequate job of that right now. That's a lesson or a message, I should say, that I've heard loud and clear from veterans. And I know that there's always discussions about facilities and providing proper doctors and nurses to care for veterans. That's something that we need to keep front and center, and cut through some of the bureaucratic difficulties. I mean, I think we have 4 different regions here in the state of Colorado when it comes to serving veterans, and the quality of care that our veterans are getting in the 3rd Congressional District is not acceptable. And that's something that I think we can and we must do better on.
So how do you do – so just out of curiosity, and again, this is Brian's expertise, so I sort of hear some of the things that – and he's having discussions constantly.
I have some ideas. And
he has some ideas, but I'd want to hear your ideas on – I think it's difficult when you're talking about numbers, and where does the federal government put resources when they're looking at it from a numbers perspective? How do we bridge that gap?
Well, I would say the people that I would talk to first and last would be people like Brian, veterans. And I would get their perspective on what the needs are and how best to allocate those dollars. I think it's critical that we spend them in the best way. Right now, we need to make sure that we're getting quality healthcare practitioners to provide services to our veterans, because right now, I think the wait that is encountered by many veterans is not acceptable. And so making sure that the dollars go to recruiting the best professionals that we can have, keep those waiting times low, making sure that our veterans get their qualifications complete as quickly as possible, get the rating. I think that the PACT Act was something that I think really moved things forward with respect to veterans, not only those who were facing burn pits like Brian and other veterans, but also going back to, I think, even Agent Orange is a part of the PACT Act. So was it perfect? No, but we don't want to make the perfect the enemy of the good, and we should always be focused on how to use those dollars in the most effective way that we can to provide the best service that we can to our veterans. So talking first and last to veterans would be something that would be high on my priority list, and not pretending that I have all the answers, but listening to ways that, especially that are creative, that can take advantage of savings and using resources in the best way to provide the best care.
No, that That actually, yes.
But yeah, Brian, tell me, what am I missing there?
No, it's a hard fight, and I've said it on this. Like the VA, back when I started doing this kind of work, it was the VA was the worst. It was the worst agency to deal with, and you had all these problems, and you had this influx of veterans coming in from Afghanistan and Iraq. So the VA was already struggling before they received 100,000 new people per year in their caseload, and then they started to do good, because we always joke Social Security was better than the VA, and then the VA kind of went past Social Security, and we saw the VA making some of the right choices. But I think unfortunately with Congress and the administrations and various changes, it was almost like they were trying to fix it, but they kept changing so much. And when you have the largest bureaucracy of the federal government, so the largest bureaucracy in the largest bureaucracy in the world, it kind of gets gummed up and stuff happens. For here in Colorado, one thing, and it's a shortage of healthcare providers, and it's not just the VA. It's talk to any rural hospital, any rural clinic. It's better now, but at one point there were some counties in the 3rd district that had one insurance provider, and then you have everybody on Medicaid. When we switched over to the health exchange and the Medicaid, some of the rules and regulations of that, they put a lot of people on Medicaid in Colorado. And that's a whole other discussion about how that money is going to pay for it after this. But so you have somebody, a veteran or a regular person living, say, in Durango, or not even Durango, say a border county or border town, their doctor's in a different state.
Right.
And now they don't have insurance, so they're on Medicaid. And you cannot use Colorado Medicaid in Kansas, or, and that was something that we always talked about, would be some sort of compact with portability of Medicaid with the surrounding states.
Oh, I like that.
And it's a tough conversation, because, Medicaid's run by the state. It is funded federally. But with the veterans, it's the same way, because you have some veterans living in Colorado that go to a different state, and then say they can't make it due to weather, which we just talked about how bad and hard it is to drive sometimes. And so they go to a different VA clinic. So instead of going to Albuquerque, they come up to Pueblo, because it's easier to get to Pueblo. It's really crazy in that the Pueblo VA clinic cannot talk to the Albuquerque clinic. They can't even get the records, and to me that seems like a very simple solution. Just if I had a magic wand, the first thing I'd do with the VA is to make it so if you go to a VA clinic in Pueblo and then you go to a different one in a different state, wherever it is, they can punch on the computer and say, oh, here's your medical records, or you're in the system. We can see you. I'm sure the IRS can do that. Social Security can do it, finally, but
why can't the VA?
Why can't the VA just simply be able to access you? Stuff like that, just simple things. And it's a lot. You can spend an entire career as a congressman or senator trying to fix the VA and maybe get a little bit done, just because, again, it's the largest bureaucracy in the largest bureaucracy. And it's tough.
Brian, that's certainly frustrating to hear, and that would be something that I think we absolutely need to focus on, that lack of connection within the VA system itself. One thing I would say also that I would do in Congress is focus on constituent services. And, that may be one specific way that, without changing the law or even changing a regulation, although I would work really hard to address things like exactly what you're talking about, I would say that my focus, I realize it's not going to be high profile. You're not going to read about it on the front page of the newspaper. But for me, one of the things that is a mark of an effective member of Congress is your constituent services, and getting people who are effective and competent and who care and who can help veterans and others navigate those kinds of challenges and find solutions within this biggest bureaucracy of the biggest bureaucracy. And so that would be something that, for me, I would ask, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, I would ask my constituents to hold me accountable when it comes to constituent services, and veterans to be vocal if they're not getting what they need, and seeing ways that my office can help get them what they need and cut through that red tape and try to get around some of those maddening inefficiencies. So that would be a big deal for me, would be constituent services. And again, it's not sexy, but it's important.
And it's really cool because, a federal agency, they go off of how many congressional cases they get. So they have to sit down and do a report. And they're like, why are we getting 200 Social Security cases or post office or whatever, VA cases from Pueblo. And they're like, the higher ups in the agency say something's not right there. And generally it works. It holds them accountable. Constituent services and casework in a congressional office are important because you're taking care of people that basically have slipped through the cracks and have nowhere else to go. And it's interesting because they'll come in and a lot of people are ashamed or they feel like they're wasting your time. And I always made a point everywhere I went, like, we can help you. Come see us and we can help you. And this is how the system kind of changes a bit. But it's really funny to see how an agency will adjust some of their policies, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, the clinic's great here in Pueblo now. All of a sudden, because they do see that, and the agencies are terrified of congressional inquiries. And it could be any agency, and it fixes the problem. And agencies recognize that it's not a perfect system and people mess up, and we're all humans and stuff. But you see other congressional offices, I'm not going to name any names right now, where you have one caseworker working on constituent services. Mm-hmm. And then you see other offices that basically won elections based on constituent services. Congressman Tipton's office is a perfect example because we prioritized constituent services. And again, it's not sexy. It's not going to make the news, or it did towards the end, which is another issue. But, for us, that shows that the member of Congress really cares, because for every person you help, they're going to tell their family. And how many times do you hear it's like, well, I don't like him or her, and but I once saw his caseworker and they helped us out, so they have my family's vote on it.
Yeah. Well, and if somebody's going to you said this one time, Brian, that if somebody's going to a congressional office for help, it's because that's their last resort.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it's absolutely their last resort. But I love to hear you say that, because I've seen the importance of it working with Brian. But not only that, when you're really good at constituent services, the payoff of that goes on long after you're there. And we're sitting with a perfect example of that, of how important that is. So I love that you say that. I'm going to ask you a question that's kind of a political one.
Sure.
And I didn't let you know I was going to ask you this, but I think it's a really important one. And it's wildly politicized. I wish it wasn't, but that is congressional directed spending. What are your feelings on that, and how would you either utilize that, or what would you do with that? Because I think it's a really important piece that has to be discussed.
Absolutely. I am in favor of congressionally directed spending that is measured and targeted and tied to results. I think that's part of what an effective representative in Congress does, is identify those projects that aren't. I don't favor pork barrel spending or wasteful government spending, but I do believe in investments in communities in a congressional district. And so congressionally directed spending done the right way, I think, is a critical part of what an effective congressional representative does, and gets dollars into the district that make sense, and that are a good use of taxpayer dollars. And so, in a good investment in communities. And so I'm in favor of congressionally directed spending done right.
So thank you for that. I appreciate it a lot, because we've seen we've seen some really great results from that, and it's you're leaving money on the table that could be used in a different way. We appreciate that. So, and
Sarah, if I might also say, getting back to what we were also talking about before, is if you talk to anybody that has worked with me in the last 20 years, or that knows me, or any of my clients, my philosophy when it comes to my practice of law in rural Colorado has been solve the problem. And that gets to constituent case services, that gets to the bigger economic issues and inflation. And that's also an issue that it comes to congressionally directed spending, solve the problem. And be creative, think outside of the box, and be solution oriented. And that's what I would tell my staff that are doing constituent services, that it's crucially important what you're doing to this veteran or for this veteran, but it's also crucially important to this water infrastructure project. The EPA is imposing a ridiculous mandate on the town of Lake City in Hinsdale County, and as a result, they need to upgrade their water infrastructure. Well, they need the resources to do that, and so that's an example, in my view, of directed spending that makes sense, that helps those communities deal with circumstances as they come. And you're right, we should not leave those dollars on the table when they can benefit southern and western Colorado.
So speaking of water, one of the big things that obviously everybody knows, like we have California and there's this whole battle of Colorado water and who gets what and where it goes. The big fear is they want to renegotiate the compact, open it back up, and then all of a sudden you have how many Congress people from California that basically overrides
54 or something,
like a third of the country, basically.
Right.
I think in the past that the congressional delegation has been unified on water in Colorado. The last 4 years, you've seen kind of a little bit of split on how water should be approached. And I know you're going to say yes, but will you do everything to fight for our water here in Colorado to make sure California doesn't steal it?
Without a doubt.
That's the layman's terms. That's the very layman's terms.
Instead of saying, of course, obviously you will, how would you do that?
Yeah.
Well, first, we need to protect the Colorado River Compact is a key part. And I realize that there are several compacts that are at play here. And we have an Arkansas River Compact. There's a Rio Grande River Compact. This district covers quite a few watersheds. But with respect to the issues that face the Colorado River Basin, and the Colorado River Basin matters here in Pueblo because we have Trans Mountain diversions that bring water from the Colorado River Basin into the North Arkansas River and ultimately help provide needed water here in Pueblo. So the Colorado River Basin, yes, we're not in it, but it matters here in southeast Colorado. The first thing is to protect the Colorado River Compact. That cannot change, in my view. That is a core bedrock principle of keeping the water equitably divided between the upper basin states and the lower basin states. I would also look at cutting through environmental regulations that are prohibiting storage, particularly distributed storage in high altitude places within the state where there's less evaporation and there's more opportunity to store the water there. There are environmental regulations right now in western Colorado that are prohibiting or inhibiting for decades the development of reasonable reservoir expansion and storage projects. We need to look at revising things like the Endangered Species Act protections that are important, that are critical, but we need to make sure that they're not unnecessarily inhibiting the expansion of those reservoirs. NEPA is another issue as well that we need to look at. So targeting those things that are preventing the expansion of water storage is another item. The third thing that I would think of that would be important are looking at invasive species, the so-called phreatophytes, which is a very fancy word for saying tamarisk and Russian olive.
Yes.
Those plants are something that are taking up a lot of water. They're also, with their deep roots, they're pulling salt up. And when the plants die, they're adding salt to the water and to the land around them. So looking at what I would say a large-scale mitigation or eradication of phreatophytes would be something else that I think we should look at and that the federal government is particularly well suited to provide. So protect the compact, make sure that our down basin cousins are living within their water budget, expanding storage, particularly high altitude distributed storage, and then looking at things like phreatophytes and getting rid of those invasive species that are sucking up the water and preventing it from beneficial use.
Yeah, and that was a huge thing 10 years ago, and then it just kind of disappeared. I know that was one of the number one concerns from the Forest Service, BLM, the state, everything was tamarisk. So, I mean, they were trying all kinds of stuff to get rid of them.
Tamarisk beetle and everything.
Yeah. Somebody was like, that's where the bark beetle's from. I was like, oh, it's not from that really. But that, you don't hear that much anymore, and that's kind of refreshing, because I go out to the reservoir and you see them everywhere. You go out there and it's like, that's really bad for the water here and the ground and everything. So I appreciate that.
Well, and that's an issue we can work on as Republicans and as Democrats as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that I would work hand in hand with Senator Hickenlooper, Senator Bennett, the rest of the congressional delegation. I think that's something that we as Coloradans can definitely come together on and fight for water with our upper basin cousins and make sure that we protect the most precious resource for us here in Colorado.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time, so that leads to the last question I had, and I don't know if Brian has a final question for you. So, what we saw in Pueblo and this is just my opinion, what we saw in Pueblo in the last couple of months with regard to the local elections was a really strong indicator for what our organization likes to see. But we hear about it a lot. So, we hear about crime and public safety and homelessness. We hear about energy. We hear about water. We hear all those things. The other one that we try not to get into, but this was interesting, what's happened here in Pueblo is for the first time, it's a really strong indicator that we've heard for a long time, is that everyone is genuinely sick of that partisanship. They're sick of as your opponent, would be in this. Adam Frisch likes to say, angertainment. And he's an Action 22 member as well. So we have these conversations with our members on a regular basis, as you know. But it's interesting that I think for the first time in a long time, people are genuinely serious because they see that how destructive that's been. So my question to you is, how do you stay out of that fray?
Well, I think by being sincere and hardworking and also humble and recognizing that I don't have all the answers to everything. I have my principles. I'm a conservative, but I know that we can't make the perfect the enemy of the good. And also we need to work within the political reality in which we find ourselves in. And for a lot of the critical issues that are facing Colorado, that requires being principled and conservative, but also recognizing that we need to work with folks that are on the other side of the aisle. I think for me personally, I would say, Sara, I will be somebody that if I disagree, I'll do it without being disagreeable. I'll try to be an effective negotiator for Western and Southern Colorado. And I'll also be open to listening to other perspectives and to recognizing that I might potentially be wrong. I know if you look back on the Sara or Brian of 20 years ago, you'd probably say, gosh, they didn't have all the answers and they didn't have all the facts. They didn't have all the perspective.
We don't have the answers now.
And I would say, the Jeff of 20 years ago is the same way, and 20 years from now, I might look back on myself and say, gosh, you didn't quite have all the answers. So having a little bit of that humility, I think, is important for somebody that's in the public sphere, and to be genuinely open to listening to other ideas and to working with people that come to the issue from a different perspective, and ultimately recognizing that we're trying to do the best thing for Western and Southern Colorado, and from Moffat County down to Los Animas County, we are all Coloradans, and that we need to make sure that solutions are at the top of what we're trying to accomplish.
So what committee would you want to be on if you get elected?
That's a good question. I would say probably either energy and commerce or natural resources would be the top committees that I would look to. Obviously, whether or not I get them is up to others, right. I think. But I think that's where I could work most effectively, would be in those committees. And I'm a hard worker and somebody that is going to put his nose to the grindstone and is focused on making not national headlines. I'm not ever going to shout at the president or anything like that. I'm going to make local headlines about jobs created and opportunities and water storage projects expanded and broadband getting into homes. Those are the sorts of things, and reliable energy projects being brought online. Those are the types of headlines that I want to make.
If, say you get in there, what would be one of the first bills you'd like to pass or introduce?
I think something that would streamline the permitting process for reservoir and storage and expansion would be a big one, and also energy. I think right now we have a big problem with the expansion of energy in Colorado, and a piece of that is a federal problem. Mm-hmm. And so those would be the two areas that I would look at, water and energy.
I love it.
So I got a few more. I got a couple more minutes.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
It was a lightning round.
No.
Now you get the hard question.
Okay, no, good.
So going back to how this race changed. So politically, it's interesting. And, in Pueblo, we saw that they don't like incumbents. Like the voters did not vote for any incumbent in Pueblo in the last election, including the mayor election this week. Interestingly enough, all the Republican seats in Congress, there's no incumbents running. I mean, you could say that Representative Boebert is running just in a different district, but the district incumbents aren't running. So since she moved over, we heard this thrown out that, it's a new race or it's a different race now. Have you noticed the shift other than more people jumping in the race, which happened, but have you noticed a shift among the groups and the people that you're talking to about it? Are they looking at this race different, or is it still, I know you're tracking the same message and that's what you do and it's the right thing to do, but has it shifted out there among
It has. Groups? I think people think I have a lot better shot. I was always optimistic about my chances, even in the primary. I believe in what I'm doing. I think there's a principle here, and I think people will recognize that. And regardless of who my primary opponent was, I think that was something that was resonating with people, and I was getting traction. Certainly now, Brian, I think people look at it and say, "Gosh, now this guy that was entered the race when the odds were really long, it looks like he could actually be the guy to win this." And so there's a lot of support that's maybe coming in that I might not have had otherwise. But I would say I had a lot of support even when the incumbent was still in the race. What I would also say, though, is that people recognize the fact that I jumped into the race at the beginning when the odds seemed long and when it seemed like a difficult task. And I think they recognize and appreciate that political courage and the principle that I had in entering the race. And they recognize that that's the type of person that we want to have representing us in Congress, is somebody that wasn't afraid to take on a tough challenge, that doesn't wait until a very powerful incumbent is left before they jump in the race. I think they respect that and they like that, and I hope that will be something that resonates with people.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's it, Jeff. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you over the last several months and what you're doing, and you jumped in. Understanding that our organization was not a partisan organization, that we want, first and foremost, to stay focused on the issues and what that's about. And so we really appreciate that you were willing to do that. We don't. We're not popular among the politicos because
we get
of
flack
that.
From both sides.
We get flack from
too conservative or too liberal. Depending
yeah,
on who
it just depends on who you are.
Maybe you're doing something right.
Yeah, that's
we hope
bad
so. We hope so, and so we appreciate you coming on and being with us.
If anybody wants to find out more about you, where do they go?
Sure. We'll get ready to get a hand cramp as you write this out because it's a long URL. It's Jeff Hurd for Congress, Jeff Hurd for Colorado.com, JEFFHURDFOR Colorado.com.
And I'll put that in the comments. So with that, Action 22, I haven't done the disclaimer for so long. It's been like 3 weeks, so I can't remember.
Do you want me to try?
No. Making action happen, Action 22. The candidates come on here. We are nonpartisan. We do not support candidates, but we do support the members of Action 22. So if you're running for office and a member of Action 22, this is your open platform to come on. The views and opinions expressed on Making Action Happen do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Action 22, its board, or its membership, except for Prop HH. I'm going to say that for the rest of the year.
That's a very lawyerly sounding disclaimer.
You did a beautiful.
Wait, is that legal? Is that
that works. That passes the test.
You did a beautiful job, but you have that gorgeous baritone voice when you do it. So, Chad Vorthman, I know that you're listening. I hope that you heard the things that you wanted to hear today, but especially we're talking a lot about, and I'm using your words a lot, about the advocacy that we are doing outside the Denver metro area, and that's really where we're trying to develop. But and we want you, Chad, to meet Jeff as soon as you can.
Hi, Chad.
And if he passes your approval, which he probably won't, but that's the most important voice here. So we thank all of you, and we'll see you next time on Making Action Happen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Sara.